At 2:15 p.m. on August 27, 2015, Thomas Reed drove away from Gino's Pizzeria, thinking he was just making another pizza delivery. By 3:24 p.m., he was dead, killed when a bomb locked around his neck exploded, while news helicopters filmed overhead. In those 69 minutes, Thomas went from being a regular pizza delivery man to the victim in one of the strangest bank robberies in American history. But the most disturbing part of the Lakeshore collar bomb case isn't just what happened to Thomas. It's that the four people behind it picked him deliberately because he was ordinary, because he lived alone, because they thought nobody would really care if he disappeared. This is the story of the last hour of Thomas Reed's life, and the four people who decided their problems mattered more than his existence. Lakeshore, Pennsylvania, sits quietly along the shores of Silver Lake. Most days, the town of 95,000 people moves at the unhurried pace common in communities that started with factories. But on August 27, 2015, Lakeshore would become the stage for a crime so bizarre that it would perplex investigators, fascinate criminologists, and horrify the nation for years to come. Thomas Reed slid into the driver's seat of his faded blue Honda Civic, placing 2 pizza warming bags on the passenger seat beside him. At 46, Thomas had the worn-out look of a man who seemed older than his years. Filling gray hair, permanent creases around pale blue eyes, hands rough and flour-dusted from decades of pizza work. His uniform shirt, bearing the Gino's Pizzeria logo, had seen better days, much like Thomas himself. For 23 years, Thomas had delivered pizzas across Lakeshore. He knew every street, every shortcut, every seasonal traffic pattern. His co-workers described him as quiet but dependable, someone who liked routine and lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment with his cat, Pepper. His criminal record consisted of a single parking ticket from 2008. No known enemies, no dramatic history. Just a man who had found his modest place in the world. The order had come in 30 minutes earlier. 2 medium pepperoni pizzas, to be delivered to a location near the old WKBR television transmission tower on the outskirts of town. It struck the counter staff as odd. The tower was no longer in use, standing abandoned on a dirt road, surrounded by overgrown fields. But they had delivered to stranger places over the years. Construction sites, fishing spots by the lake, even once to a wedding proposal set up in the middle of a hiking trail. As he drove, Thomas's mind wasn't on the unusual delivery location, but on the more mundane concerns of his life. His rent was due in 3 days. The Honda needed new brake pads. His mother's birthday was next week, and he still needed to mail her card. Ordinary worries of an ordinary man on what should have been an ordinary Thursday afternoon. What Thomas couldn't know was that for months, his regular routes, his lonely life, his reliable ways, had all been noted and catalogued by individuals who saw in him not a person, but a tool, a delivery mechanism for something far more sinister than pizza. The dirt road leading to the transmission tower was rutted from recent rains, forcing Thomas to slow the Honda to a crawl. The tower itself rose against the summer sky like an industrial skeleton, surrounded by a chain-link fence bearing faded "No Trespassing" signs. As Thomas approached, he saw no vehicles, no construction equipment, nothing to indicate who might have ordered pizza to this desolate location. He parked near the tower's base and stepped out, pizza bags in hand, scanning the area with growing unease. The late August heat pressed down, the air heavy with humidity and the distant promise of thunderstorms. "Hello?" Thomas called out, his voice echoing slightly against the metal structure. "Pizza delivery!" The response came, not as a voice, but as movement. A figure emerging from behind the tower's concrete base, then another from the nearby tree line, a third from inside a small maintenance shed Thomas hadn't noticed initially. The person who appeared to be in charge was a woman in her early 60s. She greeted Thomas by name, immediately triggering alarm bells in his head. Before Thomas could process the situation, the other two figures, both men who moved with disturbing efficiency, were upon him. One pressed a gun into his side, while the other took the pizza bags, setting them carefully on the hood of Thomas's car. When Thomas begged them to take his wallet or car, the woman coldly explained that this wasn't a simple robbery. She explained with clinical detachment that Thomas would be making a withdrawal for them today from First Regional Bank on Main Street. "Why me?" asked Thomas softly, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "Because no one will miss you," the woman replied matter-of-factly, her voice as casual as if discussing the weather. The man, called Vincent, opened a metallic case, revealing what appeared to be a heavy collar with a rectangular box attached. Thomas instinctively stepped back, but the gun pressed harder into his ribs. The woman explained what would happen next with unnerving calmness. The device around his neck was real and deadly. Following their instructions would allow Thomas to remove it before detonation. Any deviation, attempt to contact authorities, or failure to meet their timeline would result in immediate detonation. Thomas felt his world narrowing, darkness crowding the edges of his vision, as the collar was secured around his neck. The weight of it, both physical and psychological, was immediately overwhelming. When he quietly asked why they picked him, the woman responded with brutal honesty. Thomas was perfect because he wasn't important, had no family nearby, and nobody would really miss him. "Please," Thomas said, his voice breaking, "I have a cat waiting for me at home." The woman's expression didn't change as she placed a notebook in Thomas's trembling hands containing step-by-step instructions. The first page explained the bank robbery. The rest would guide him to keys and combination codes that would disarm and remove the device. The third man, who had remained silent throughout, handed Thomas what appeared to be a walking cane, explaining it was a disguised shotgun to be used as an insurance policy if absolutely necessary. Thomas looked down at the objects in his hands, then at the device now locked around his neck. A small digital display on its front showed a timer counting down from 1 hour. As the conspirators retreated to a black sedan parked behind the maintenance shed, Thomas remained rooted in place, the full horror of his situation still sinking in. At 2:38 p.m., Thomas Reed stood alone at the WKBR tower, transformed from an ordinary pizza delivery man into a reluctant bank robber with a bomb around his neck and less than an hour to save his life. The choice before him was impossible. Attempt to comply with the demands and perhaps survive, or refuse and certainly die. He got into his Honda, placed the cane shotgun on the passenger seat, and started the engine with shaking hands. The timer on the collar continued its relentless countdown. Eleanor Marsh didn't look like someone who would plan a terrible crime. She resembled a retired school teacher more than a criminal mastermind. Those who knew Eleanor described a woman of extremes, brilliant but unstable, charming one moment and coldly calculating the next. A former colleague later told police that Eleanor was like a storm, beautiful from a distance, but destructive up close, with no way to predict which version of her you might encounter on any given day. Born to wealthy parents in Lakeshore's affluent Oak Ridge neighborhood, Eleanor had been raised in privilege and educational opportunity. By age 30, she had earned a PhD in mathematics from Princeton and established herself as a promising researcher in chaos theory. But what had seemed like academic intensity in her youth gradually revealed itself as something more troubling. Eleanor had been diagnosed with serious mental illness in her 30s, a condition she managed inconsistently at best. Her adult life was marked by instability, failed marriages, estranged friends, conflicts with university colleagues, and a string of legal troubles ranging from harassment to assault. Beneath the chaos, however, remained a mind of remarkable intelligence and calculation. By 2015, Eleanor's relationship with her 87-year-old father, Gregory, a retired banker with substantial wealth, had deteriorated into bitter resentment. Gregory had threatened multiple times to remove Eleanor from his will, citing her unstable behavior and financial irresponsibility.
"You're not fit to handle money,"
he had told her during their last argument.
"You'll waste everything I've worked for."
Eleanor's bank accounts were nearly empty. Legal fees from previous criminal cases had drained her resources. Her medication costs were substantial, and her father's continued good health stood between her and what she viewed as her rightful inheritance. Vincent Harris had once been a respected television repair technician before the digital age rendered his skills obsolete. His descent into criminality had been gradual, first sharing his prescription painkillers with friends after a back injury, then making connections that led to more profitable substances. At 6'3", with broad shoulders and hands large enough to palm a basketball, Vincent's physical presence contrasted with his soft-spoken demeanor. During a drug transaction in March 2015, Eleanor had proposed a startling solution to their mutual financial problems. For $125,000, she wanted Vincent to kill her father. When Vincent hesitated, noting this wasn't his line of work, Eleanor pressed the point. Her father took sleeping pills. The house had no alarm system. She had a key. It could be one job, one night, and solve both their problems. Vincent's reluctance was understandable. Murder wasn't in his history. But his circumstances were becoming desperate. His drug business was suffering as younger dealers with better connections moved into the territory. His own addiction was deepening, and Eleanor had correctly identified that he needed a way out. When Vincent questioned where Eleanor would get that kind of money given her financial state, she explained with cold precision that she had been developing a plan to obtain untraceable cash, a plan that would soon trap an innocent pizza man. But Eleanor and Vincent needed more people, specific skills that neither possessed. They needed technical expertise. Robert Lynch had known Eleanor for nearly 3 decades. Their relationship defied simple categorization, sometimes romantic, sometimes adversarial, always complicated. At 64, Robert was a former electrical engineer whose promising career at GE had derailed after an injury led to painkiller addiction and eventually termination. Despite his personal troubles, Robert possessed remarkable technical skills and maintained a cluttered workshop behind his modest ranch house on Cedar Lane. There, he repaired electronics for cash and tinkered with increasingly complex projects that straddled the line between invention and obsession. When Eleanor visited his workshop in early April with her proposal for a specialized collar device with timer and triggering mechanisms, Robert immediately recognized it for what it was: a bomb. He initially refused to participate, but Eleanor had anticipated his reluctance. She showed photos of Robert selling pills to college students, surveillance she had conducted as insurance. The threat was clear: help with the collar bomb, or these photos would find their way to the police. With Robert's record, it would mean a substantial prison sentence, leaving his 92-year-old mother, for whom he was the sole caretaker, alone or in state care. Who would take care of her, Robert? Eleanor had asked pointedly. The state? You know what those places are like. Robert capitulated, recognizing the trap Eleanor had set. She outlined her requirements for the device: a collar bomb that looked terrifying enough to convince a bank to empty their drawers, but which could theoretically be disabled with the right sequence of keys and codes. When he objected to using a person as a weapon, Eleanor reframed the situation as a mutually beneficial arrangement. Her involvement would ensure his mother's continued care, and the photographs would be destroyed after the operation's completion. By early May, Robert had reluctantly begun gathering components. His workshop, once a sanctuary for creative projects, became the laboratory where the collar bomb took shape. Each evening, after settling his mother to sleep, he worked on the device with a combination of technical precision and moral revulsion. Eleanor's specifications for the device were detailed and disturbing. The triggering mechanism needed to be foolproof, with multiple detonation methods, timer, tampering sensors, removal attempts. She also specified a disarming mechanism involving keys and codes, creating what she described as a scavenger hunt for the victim. What neither Eleanor nor Robert discussed directly was the implication of these specifications: that the person wearing the collar was, in their calculations, expendable. The final member of the conspiracy came through Vincent's connections. Daniel Foster, a 44-year-old maintenance supervisor for the local television stations, had access to the grounds around multiple transmission towers, including the isolated WKBR tower. He also had a gambling problem that had left him $30,000 in debt to dangerous people. Eleanor's proposal was straightforward: $10,000 for use of the tower and assistance with the initial phase of the operation. Daniel, a heavy-set man with perpetually worried eyes, asked few questions about the plan. When Vincent mentioned a special delivery and a bank, Daniel simply nodded and requested half the payment in advance. Eleanor provided $5,000 in cash as a down payment, noting that trust was earned, and he would receive the remainder when their delivery man completed his route. Over the next 2 months, in the stifling summer heat of Robert's garage workshop, the plan took shape alongside the bomb itself. The device was ingenious in its terrible way: a hinged metal collar that would lock securely around the victim's neck, with a reinforced box containing 3 pipe bombs filled with homemade explosives, 2 kitchen timers modified to act as triggering mechanisms, a mercury switch that would detect tampering, and multiple dummy wires to confuse any attempt to disarm it. The collar could only be removed with multiple keys and combination codes that would be scattered throughout town, according to the scavenger hunt instructions. When Robert raised questions about finding someone to wear the device, Eleanor revealed she had already selected the perfect candidate. Thomas Reed, who delivered for Gino's Pizzeria, lived alone with no close family in the area. His routine-oriented nature and unremarkable profile made him ideal for their purposes. For weeks, they had observed Thomas, learned his schedule. The conspirators even ordered pizzas legitimately from Gino's to observe him and the delivery procedures. They collected information that would make their selection appear random when investigators later tried to piece together why Thomas Reed had been chosen. When Robert asked what would happen if Thomas refused to participate, Eleanor confidently asserted that once the collar was on, human survival instinct would take over. He would follow the instructions precisely. Vincent eventually raised the critical question about what would happen if Thomas succeeded, if he completed all the tasks, obtained the money, and found all the keys to remove the collar.
And then what?
Vincent asked. He can identify all of us. Eleanor's response was ambiguous but telling. She claimed that in such a scenario, Thomas would live to tell the tale. However, the subtle exchange of glances between Eleanor and Robert suggested another truth. The collar bomb had not been designed with successful removal as a likely outcome. August 27th, were selected as the date. All the pieces were in place. 4 people prepared to execute a plan that would destroy multiple lives, including their own. What they couldn't predict was how quickly their perfect plan would unravel. The timer on the color bomb showed 54 minutes remaining and counting down. The handwritten instructions directed him to First Regional Bank on Main Street. Thomas drove with shaking hands, his mind racing to process what was happening, the collar heavy and cold against his skin. Several witnesses later reported seeing his blue Honda speeding through town, but no one could see the horror hidden beneath his Gino's Pizzeria uniform shirt. Thomas parked in a loading zone half a block from the bank. He considered running to the police station 3 blocks away, to the hospital, anywhere that might have people who could help him. But the woman's warning echoed in his mind, immediate detonation if he contacted authorities. Was she watching him now? Were there observers positioned around the bank? Thomas had no way to know, and the risk was too great. He reached for the notebook of instructions, flipping to the first page with trembling fingers. The message was clear. Enter the bank, approach any teller, present the enclosed note, accept whatever money was provided, and proceed to Lakeside Park for the next instructions. Taking a deep breath, Thomas tucked the disguised shotgun cane under his arm, not because he intended to use it, but because the instructions specified he must carry it, and exited the car. The bank's glass doors stood ahead, shining bright in the afternoon sun. Just stay calm, he muttered to himself. Do exactly what they want. At exactly 2:49 p.m., security cameras captured Thomas entering the bank. He walked stiffly to the counter, his movements constrained by fear. The young teller, Jessica Morris, would later describe Thomas as pale and sweating profusely, like someone having a medical emergency. Thomas couldn't speak when Jessica greeted him. Instead, he unfolded a note from the instruction notebook and slid it across the counter. Jessica read it silently, her expression changing from confused to alarmed as she understood the message about the bomb locked around his neck and the demand for $250,000. Jessica looked up, meeting Thomas's desperate gaze. In that quiet moment, she understood his predicament. He whispered that they weren't giving him a choice. I don't want to hurt anyone, Thomas said so quietly. Jessica barely heard him. They put this thing on me. Jessica nodded, almost imperceptibly, and turned to her cash drawer. The bank manager, alerted by another teller's silent signal, activated the silent alarm. As Jessica gathered the money, she explained in a low voice that she could only access what was in her drawer, about $8,700. The vault would require approval from regional management due to time lock protocols. Thomas accepted this limitation, telling her whatever she could provide would suffice. He simply needed to follow the instructions. When Jessica asked if she should call someone to help, Thomas declined, explaining that they were watching and any police involvement would trigger the bomb. At 2:56 p.m., less than 7 minutes after entering, Thomas left the bank with the money. According to the bomb's timer, he now had approximately 45 minutes remaining. The instructions directed him to proceed to Lakeside Park, where he would find the next clue beneath a specific rock near the boathouse. Thomas had only driven 3 blocks when he saw the first police car. Officer Kevin Mitchell had responded to the bank's silent alarm and spotted the blue Honda, matching the description provided by bank staff. Thomas initially accelerated, but quickly realized the futility of running. The collar bond's timer continued its countdown, each second bringing him closer to death, whether police intervened or not. He pulled into the parking lot of West Side Shopping Center, stopping his car near Carson's Hardware. For a moment, he sat motionless, contemplating his options, none of them good. At 3:44 p.m., Thomas Reed stepped out of his car with his hands raised. Officer Mitchell, maintaining distance, ordered Thomas to lie on the ground. Additional police units arrived within minutes, creating a perimeter around the scene. "There's a bomb around my neck," Thomas called out, his voice breaking. "It's going to explode if I don't keep following their instructions." What happened next has been debated extensively in law enforcement circles. Officer Mitchell followed protocol for bomb threats, establishing a safety perimeter and calling for specialized units. But the nearest bomb squad was based in Harrisburg, over 90 minutes away. Thomas sat on the asphalt, the collar now fully visible, as officers used binoculars to assess the situation from behind their vehicles. The timer on the bomb showed 37 minutes remaining. Thomas repeatedly told officers he needed to find keys hidden around town, that this was the only way to remove the device. This presented police with an impossible dilemma. Approach the potential bomb to attempt disarming, allow Thomas to continue the scavenger hunt under surveillance, or maintain distance and wait for specialists. Captain James Lawson arrived on scene at 3:12 p.m., quickly assuming command. After consulting with the remote bomb squad by phone and examining the device through high-powered binoculars, he made the fateful decision to maintain the perimeter and wait. Through a loudspeaker, Lawson informed Thomas that the bomb squad was en route, instructing him to remain still and calm. Thomas, still seated on the asphalt, shook his head in despair. He glanced down at the timer. "They won't get here in time," Thomas called back, his voice carrying across the empty space between them. By now, local news helicopters circled overhead. Curious bystanders gathered at the edges of the police perimeter, smartphones recording the scene. What began as a private nightmare was transforming into a public spectacle. At 3:17 p.m., Thomas made a decision. Rising slowly to his feet, hands still raised, he called out to the officers that he would remove his shirt so they could better see the device. Captain Lawson agreed through the loudspeaker, instructing Thomas to move very slowly. Thomas carefully unbuttoned his Gino's Pizzeria shirt and removed it, revealing the metal collar locked around his neck. The rectangular box hung at the front, its digital display now showing less than 30 minutes remaining. The bomb squad, still more than an hour away, requested close-up photos of the device. An officer with a telephoto lens captured several images that were immediately transmitted to the explosive experts. Their assessment came back quickly and definitively. The bomb appeared genuine, with multiple triggering mechanisms. They instructed officers not to attempt removal or disarming and to maintain a safe distance. Thomas, unaware of these communications, stood alone in the center of the parking lot, the afternoon sun beating down on him as the collar's weight seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. "I need to keep following the instructions," he shouted to Captain Lawson. "Please, there's still time." Captain Lawson faced an impossible choice. Protocol dictated keeping Thomas in place until specialists arrived. That the visible timer on the color device made it clear the bomb squad would not arrive before detonation. At 3:24 p.m., a news helicopter filmed the moment that no one who saw it would ever forget. The collar bomb exploded. The explosion was contained primarily around Thomas's neck and upper chest. He died instantly. First responders who had been waiting behind the perimeter rushed forward, but there was nothing to be done. Thomas Reed, a man who had started his day making pizzas, was dead in a parking lot, the victim of a crime so strange that police at first didn't know what to call it. News of the collar bomb robbery spread rapidly. By nightfall, the story had reached national news outlets. The shocking nature of the crime, a man forced to rob a bank with a live bomb around his neck, captivated and horrified the public. But the initial narrative was incomplete. Many assumed Thomas was merely an innocent victim. Others speculated he might have been involved in planning the crime. The truth, as investigators would discover, was both simpler and more disturbing. As the sun set on Lakeshore that evening, 4 conspirators believed they had executed the perfect crime. Eleanor Marsh sat in her father's home, watching news reports with feigned shock. Robert Lynch methodically cleaned his workshop. Vincent Harris prepared to leave town. Daniel Foster drank heavily in his apartment, trying to drown out what he had witnessed. None of them realized that their elaborate plan had already begun to unravel. Detective Sarah Kaplan had been with the Lakeshore Police Department for 14 years. She was known for her meticulous attention to detail and determination, with a special talent for connecting seemingly unrelated evidence. The Collarbon case became her obsession from the moment she was assigned as lead investigator. This wasn't just a murder, she would later write in her case notes. It was a puzzle box with a dead man at the center. The investigation began with Thomas Reed himself. Was he truly an innocent victim, or had he participated in planning the crime? Detectives scoured his modest apartment, interviewed co-workers, analyzed his bank records and phone logs. Thomas lived simply. His bank account showed consistent deposits from Gino's Pizzeria and regular withdrawals for rent, utilities, and cat food. His call history revealed communication with only a handful of people: his sister in Ohio, a few co-workers, and occasional calls to local businesses. Nothing indicated links to criminal elements. The more we learned about Thomas Reed, Detective Kaplan noted, the more ordinary he seemed, and that made what happened to him even more extraordinary. Jessica Morris, the bank teller who had interacted with Thomas during the robbery, provided crucial testimony about his demeanor. She described a man who was terrified rather than threatening, someone who appeared to be a victim rather than a willing participant. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the note. Jessica told Detective Kaplan. His eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. They were begging for help. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. 5 days after the robbery, police received an anonymous call directing them to check the WKBR transmission tower. Detective Kaplan recognized the location immediately. It was remote, abandoned, and would provide privacy for criminal activity. Moreover, it was only a few miles from where Thomas Reed had received the delivery call that had led him to his death. When police arrived at the transmission tower, evidence of recent activity was immediately apparent. Tire tracks from multiple vehicles marked the dirt access road. Cigarette butts of at least 2 different brands littered the ground near the tower's base. And, most significantly, 2 pizza boxes from Gino's Pizzeria sat on a small concrete maintenance platform. Forensic technicians processed the scene meticulously. Fingerprints were recovered from the pizza boxes, Thomas Reed's, as expected, but also partials from at least 2 other individuals. DNA samples were collected from the cigarette butts. Tire impressions were cast for comparison analysis. One of the evidence technicians discovered something else, a small metal fragment that appeared to match the construction of the collarbone, based on post-explosion fragments recovered from the parking lot scene. As evidence accumulated, Kaplan's team began reconstructing the timeline of Thomas Reed's final hours. Security footage from a hardware store across from Gino's Pizzeria showed Thomas leaving with the pizza delivery at 2:15 p.m. His GPS records confirmed arrival at the tower location at 2:28 p.m. By 2:38 p.m., call records showed his phone moving away from the tower, beginning the journey that would end in tragedy. This established a 10-minute window when Thomas encountered the conspirators. 10 minutes in which they transformed him from a delivery driver into a walking bomb. A critical question remained. Was the scavenger hunt Thomas had been attempting to follow real, or merely a cruel fiction designed to give him false hope while the timer ran down? Examination of bomb fragments revealed sophisticated engineering, confirming what bomb technicians had suspected from the transmitted photos. This was not an amateur device. The collar's construction showed advanced knowledge of electrical engineering, with multiple redundant triggering mechanisms. FBI bomb expert Marcus Wilson identified specialized skills needed to build such a device, narrowing the pool of potential suspects to those with electrical engineering backgrounds. Analysis of the handwritten instructions found in Thomas's car revealed another important clue. The paper was an unusual high-cotton archival type, typically used in academic settings or for art projects. The handwriting showed evidence of formal education and distinctive letter formations that suggested someone over 50 years old who had received formal penmanship training, increasingly rare in the digital age. 2 weeks into the investigation, another breakthrough occurred. Daniel Foster, the maintenance supervisor for the local television stations, was pulled over for driving under the influence after leaving the Rusty Nail, a bar on Lakeshore's south side. In his intoxicated state, he made an incriminating statement to the arresting officer. "I just held him down. I didn't put that thing on him," Foster had slurred. "I never wanted him to die." Officer Tracy Williams immediately recognized the significance of this statement and contacted Detective Kaplan, who arrived at the station within 20 minutes to interview Foster. Initially, Foster denied any knowledge of the incident, claiming he said nonsensical things when drunk. However, when Kaplan outlined the severity of the charges associated with the case and the mounting evidence from the tower site, Foster capitulated. After consulting with a public defender, Foster agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. His statement, recorded over nearly 6 hours, provided investigators with the missing pieces they needed. Foster admitted his role in providing access to the transmission tower and helping to restrain Thomas Reed while the collar was attached. He identified the other conspirators, Eleanor Marsh as the mastermind, Robert Lynch as the bomb maker, and Vincent Harris as the third accomplice. Foster's testimony revealed the cold calculation behind the plot. Each conspirator had clear financial motives. Eleanor needed money to counter her father's threats of disinheritance. Lynch needed funds for his mother's care. Harris had drug debts. Foster himself had gambling debts to dangerous creditors. Most disturbing was Foster's explanation of why Thomas Reed had been selected. According to Foster, Eleanor had chosen him specifically because he was nobody. A person whose disappearance would not generate significant attention or investigation. The callousness of this selection particularly disturbed Kaplan. Thomas Reed had been chosen precisely because his ordinary life made him seem disposable to people like Eleanor Marsh. Within hours of Foster's confession, SWAT teams were deployed to arrest the remaining conspirators. Vincent Harris was taken into custody at a bus station, ticket to Atlanta in hand. Eleanor Marsh was arrested at her father's home. As officers led Eleanor from her father's house in handcuffs, she maintained her composure, her face a mask of indignation rather than guilt. "This is a mistake," she told the officers calmly. "I'm a respected mathematician, not a criminal." Robert Lynch, however, remained elusive. When officers arrived at his Cedar Lane home, they found his 92-year-old mother alone and confused, unaware of her son's whereabouts. A search of the property revealed the workshop behind the house had been meticulously cleaned, too clean, suggesting evidence had been deliberately destroyed. Robert Lynch remained at large for 9 days, until police received another anonymous tip directing them to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. Inside Unit 217, officers discovered Robert's body. He had died from an apparent overdose of prescription medications. Beside his body lay a handwritten confession, stating he never intended for Thomas to die. According to the note, the timer was supposed to give Thomas 3 hours, not 1. Eleanor had changed it the night before, saying it would create more pressure and make him move faster. The note concluded with Robert's statement that he couldn't live with what had happened, along with an apology to his mother. "I became part of something terrible," his note read. "I can't live with what we did to that poor man." With 3 conspirators in custody or deceased, investigators began assembling the full picture of the crime. Searches of all 4 conspirators' properties revealed the extensive planning behind the Collarbone plot. In Eleanor's home, detectives found detailed notes about her father's will and life insurance policies. They discovered research on bank security protocols, police response times, and even technical documents about explosive devices downloaded from the dark web. Computer records showed extensive research on previous cases involving explosive devices, particularly studies of a 2003 bank robbery in Erie that had used a similar technique. Eleanor had been methodically planning this crime for months, but perhaps the most disturbing discovery came from Robert Lynch's storage unit. Beyond his body and confession, investigators found detailed designs for multiple collarbones, each more sophisticated than the one used on Thomas Reed. This evidence suggested the August 27th incident was potentially intended to be only the first in a series of similar crimes. Had they not been caught, the conspirators might have refined their technique for subsequent attempts, creating more victims like Thomas Reed. This discovery alarmed law enforcement nationwide, transforming the case from a singular tragedy to a narrowly averted series of horrors. The trial of Eleanor Marsh began 14 months after Thomas Reed's death. The courtroom was packed daily with journalists, curious citizens, and Thomas's family members, who had traveled from across the country to seek justice for their lost son, brother, and uncle. Eleanor wore carefully selected outfits each day that emphasized her age and apparent frailty. Pastel sweater sets, modest skirts, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. It was a calculated performance designed to make jurors question whether this grandmotherly figure could truly mastermind such a brutal crime. The prosecution built their case methodically. Over 28 days, they called 93 witnesses, including bank employees who described Thomas's desperate demeanor during the robbery, police officers who witnessed his final moments, forensics experts who detailed the sophisticated design of the bone, and the 2 surviving conspirators who had accepted plea deals in exchange for their testimony. The physical evidence was equally compelling. The prosecution presented workshop materials matching the bomb components, Eleanor's financial records showing her desperate situation, handwritten notes detailing the plan, and DNA evidence linking all 4 conspirators to items found at the transmission tower. Most damaging was a recovered voice recording from Robert Lynch's phone. In it, Eleanor could be heard clearly saying, "If the delivery boy doesn't move fast enough, that's not our problem. Once the collar goes on, he either gets us the money or becomes a message to the next one." Eleanor's defense team, led by prominent attorney James Westbrook, pursued an insanity defense. They brought in psychiatric experts who testified about her bipolar disorder and its effects on decision-making and empathy. "My client was in the grip of a manic episode," Westbrook argued in his closing statement. "Her mental illness, financial troubles, and improper medication combined to create a perfect storm that distorted her thinking and moral compass." When Eleanor took the stand in her own defense, she portrayed herself as a victim of manipulation by Robert Lynch, whom she claimed had conceived the entire plan. She testified that Robert had become obsessed with explosives and showed her the collar as one of his projects, something she never believed he would actually use. She denied selecting Thomas Reed as the victim and claimed she wasn't present when the device was placed on him.
"I never wanted anyone to get hurt,"
Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly as she addressed the jury.
"This terrible plan was Robert's creation, not mine." Detective Kaplan, sitting in the gallery, noted how effectively Eleanor maintained eye contact with the jury while delivering these claims. Even knowing the overwhelming evidence against her, it was difficult not to be swayed by her performance. During cross-examination, the prosecutor methodically dismantled Eleanor's story, with phone records placing her at the tower site, forensic evidence linking her handwriting to the instructions, and Foster's testimony describing her leadership role. After 9 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict on November 17, 2016. Guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, conspiracy, armed robbery, and weapons charges. 1 month later, Judge Hammond sentenced Eleanor Marsh to life imprisonment without possibility of parole, plus 95 additional years for the remaining charges. The court rarely encounters crimes that combine such calculated cruelty with such disregard for human life, Judge Hammond stated during sentencing. "You transformed a living, breathing human being into a tool for your financial gain. Your actions show not just a plan to commit crime, but a profound absence of compassion that this court finds particularly disturbing."
Vincent Harris, having cooperated with prosecutors, received 40 years. Daniel Foster, who had provided crucial testimony against the others, was sentenced to 22 years. Outside the courthouse after sentencing, Karen Reed, Thomas's sister, spoke briefly to assembled reporters. She described her brother not as the pizza guy, but as a devoted son who called their mother every Sunday, a man who remembered customers' children's birthdays and worked holidays so colleagues could be with their families. These conspirators, she said, had turned him into a weapon for their greed. No sentence could repair what they had broken in her family. "They chose my brother because they thought no one would miss him," Karen said, her voice breaking. "They were wrong." The Lakeshore Collar Bond case changed law enforcement protocols nationwide. The Reed protocols were developed for responding to potential explosive devices attached to persons, emphasizing rapid deployment of bomb specialists and improved communication systems. Banks implemented new verification systems for delivery personnel entering their premises. Pizza delivery services established emergency codes and tracking systems for drivers. The FBI created a specialized unit focused on explosive device threats involving human carriers. But beyond these pragmatic changes, the case left deeper questions that haunted both investigators and the public. What combination of desperation, mental illness, and moral failure allows someone to transform another human being into a walking bomb? How thin is the veneer of civilization that keeps most of us from such extreme acts? And perhaps, most haunting, what impossible choices would each of us make with a bomb around our neck and a timer counting down? What moral lines might blur when everything, future, identity, survival itself, is compressed into a desperate hour? In Thomas Reed's apartment, untouched for months after his death, investigators found a calendar on his refrigerator. August 27th had a single notation: "Ask about vacation days." It was a small reminder that Thomas had been planning for a future that was stolen from him, not by random chance or natural disaster, but by a conspiracy that viewed him as nothing more than a tool for their purposes.
Thomas's cat, Pepper, was adopted by Karen, his sister. She reported that for months after moving to her home in Ohio, Pepper would wait by the door around 5:30 p.m., the time Thomas typically returned from his shift at Gino's.
Some patterns remain, even after the person who created them is gone. 5 years after the collar bomb explosion, a small group gathered at Lakeside Cemetery to dedicate a memorial bench for Thomas Reed. His former co-workers from Gino's Pizzeria had collected donations, enough for a simple granite bench. The ceremony was brief, attended by family, friends, and several regular customers who had known Thomas from years of pizza deliveries. The physical evidence from the Lakeshore collar bomb case is now used at the FBI's training center in Quantico, where it serves as a teaching tool for new agents specializing in unusual explosive devices and criminal psychology. The case study emphasizes not just the technical aspects of the bomb itself, but the psychological manipulation that turned Thomas Reed from delivery driver to unwilling bank robber. Eleanor Marsh, now serving her life sentence at Mountain View Women's Correctional Facility, has become a subject of macabre fascination. She receives dozens of letters weekly from true crime enthusiasts, psychology students, and the merely curious. She responds selectively, never acknowledging guilt, but often hinting at what really happened to maintain interest in her case. In 2022, she filed another appeal based on new interpretations of mental health considerations in sentencing, but it was rejected by the state Supreme Court. Her remaining legal options are limited. Gregory Marsh, Eleanor's father and the intended ultimate victim of the plot, died peacefully of natural causes in 2017. His will, revised after Eleanor's arrest, left his entire estate to a foundation supporting victims of violent crime. Vincent Harris continues serving his sentence, having become a model prisoner who leads a support group for inmates with addiction issues. Daniel Foster, eligible for release in 2029, suffers from severe post-traumatic stress disorder and spends much of his time in the prison's psychiatric unit. The case has spawned countless retellings, documentaries, podcasts, books, and a controversial Hollywood film that Thomas's family denounced for its sensationalism. The streaming documentary, Collar, 54 Minutes to Death, won an Emmy in 2019 for its unflinching accuracy and its focus on Thomas Reed as a person rather than merely a victim. Karen Reed has become an advocate for delivery driver safety, establishing a foundation that provides emergency assistance and mental health support for delivery workers who experience trauma on the job. The Thomas Reed Safety Initiative has helped implement panic button systems in delivery vehicles across 3 states. At a foundation fundraiser, she expressed that her brother had been invisible to most people, just the pizza guy. That invisibility made him an easy target for people like Eleanor Marsh, who believed no one would notice or care about his disappearance. A primary goal of her foundation is ensuring delivery workers are recognized as full human beings, not just functions. In the years since this terrible crime, Lakeshore has rebuilt itself. New businesses occupy the spaces where key events unfolded. Children too young to remember the case play in the park where Thomas Reed spent his final desperate hour. Life continues. But in FBI databases, in criminology textbooks, in the nightmares of those who witnessed it, and in the collective memory of a community, the collar bomb case remains a reminder that humans can be both cruel and brave when facing an impossible countdown. You've been watching Crime Fictional. If this story shook you, disturbed you, or made you think twice about the strangers we encounter every day, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and remember that ordinary people
can hide extraordinary darkness.